Hi, my name is Stephanie Simon, and I'm delighted to be here with Dr. Sue Goldie. I know Sue as an outstanding scientist, educator, mentor, and of course athlete. And she's also a person living with Parkinson's disease. So today we'll talk about how all those different identities intersect. Sue has more titles and honors than I could possibly name, but I'm contractually obligated to list a few, so I will just share a few of them. She's the Roger Irving Lee Professor of Public Health, the Director of the Center for Health Decision Sciences at Harvard Chan School, and she directs the Global Health Education and Learning Incubator at Harvard University. And Sue is also the recipient, among many of your honors, of a MacArthur Genius Grant, which you earned for your work applying the analytic tools of health decision science to public health challenges. So welcome to the studio, Sue.
Thank you.
So let's start with just talking a baseline description of what Parkinson's disease is and how it affects the body.
So here's your Parkinson's 101. So deep in our brainstem, we have some cells, neurons, nerve cells, that are responsible for producing dopamine. And dopamine is a chemical messenger, a neurotransmitter. Basically, our nerve cells do everything all other cells do, but they also are great communicators, generally. So those cells that produce dopamine degenerate over time in someone with Parkinson's disease. And they're really important because they're part of a network of interconnected cells that are responsible for the kind of the smoothness, the initiation, the amplitude of how we move. So it's not like a stroke where if you have a stroke, you may not be able to move a part of your body. It's actually, I can move, but the smoothness and how large those movements are, the initiation of those movements are more difficult. Now, the shortage of dopamine leads to what we say are the motor symptoms. There's a few motor symptoms of Parkinson's you've probably heard of. There's a tremor often. There can be rigidity, and there can also be slowness of movement, which we call bradykinesia. And then finally, towards the later stages of Parkinson's, there can be problems with balance and gait. Now, what people don't realize is there's other problems that happen in Parkinson's. So dopamine has some other effects. It has some other pathways it's influential on. So it has a pathway that affects your emotion and potentially your mood. So anxiety and depression can be seen. There's a pathway that can go to what we think about as where our brain controls our executive functions. So there could be cognitive effects. And then finally, this is kind of like the bad news as you read the science, is that it's really a cellular problem too. So there are problems in the cells where your energy producing factories, your mitochondria, let me take you back to like science, and the cleanup, recycling, and waste disposal systems in your cell, the lysosomes also over time become dysfunctional. And so we see things even in the peripheral nervous system, like the autonomic nervous system that controls your digestion and your heart rate and sweating. So it's really a multi-system disorder, even though it's called a motor disorder. And I'll say one last thing, and I'll probably say it more than once, and that is that the one thing about Parkinson's that is absolutely true is it plays out differently in everyone. So the particular symptoms you might have, the particular parts of your body that are affected, the speed at which you progress is really variable, and the timing of that is uncertain.
I think that explains right there why she's such an excellent professor and educator. That was terrific. So Sue, take us back to when you first started noticing symptoms and how you were eventually diagnosed.
So, interestingly, a lot of people will think about their diagnosis in Parkinson's and they will think back before the formal diagnosis and say, aha, some little signs. So I was officially diagnosed in 2021. But the story happened really a couple of years earlier is when that story began. And two very seemingly unrelated things were going on in my life. I wasn't feeling well. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I just wasn't feeling well. And if you're a professor at Harvard, you're always tired, so it becomes difficult to distinguish what's going on. At the same time, my older son was doing an Ironman. He was training for an Ironman. I know those seem unrelated. But I was enamored with the whole training. Like, why would anyone want to do that was my first reaction. And I bought him a gift of a training camp, and I told him, I'm going to go with you to this training camp. That's just what you want to hear from your mother. And I promise you will not see me. And for the most part, I kept to my word, except for the one time I was in a tree watching the swim clinic. And I was sort of swept away at just the impossibility of it, but yet somehow lots of regular people were kind of doing it. And I watched his race. Long story short, came home, told my husband, I'm going to do an Ironman. He says, you don't bike or swim. I go, small point. Bought a bike, got a coach, and my coach's name is Jeff, and we sat in Starbucks, and I told him how much I could do, and he's looking at me. He said, and what are those index cards? I'm like, it's the races I've signed up for. And we got started. And over that first year of training, year and a half, he would notice that my cadence was a little bit low, that I had a slow uptick on my left side when I was swimming. And there were just little signs. And at work, I was noticing I didn't want to write. I didn't feel like writing that much, which is really unusual for me. So long story short, I developed insidiously a left-sided tremor. And that was what brought me finally to a neurologist. As a doctor, I was pretty sure I knew what it was, and I got the diagnosis. For those of you that don't know, it's a clinical diagnosis, and so it's based on having presence of bradykinesia, that slowness of movement, and at least one other of those motor symptoms.
So once you got the diagnosis, you knew you could put together what was happening based on all of those symptoms. But what was it like for that first year or two after you got the diagnosis, trying to adjust mentally and physically?
It was super hard. I read, my first reaction was to read the science. And the science, there were two flavors. One that was really hard for me, the basic science, understanding it and realizing this was just not a shortage of dopamine. You replace the dopamine and I'd be okay. As you know, because you had Parkinson's 101 a few minutes ago. The second is I was unbelievably struck at the literature I was reading about the importance of exercise. And Jeff, my coach, was a really important person in my life then. Aaron, my husband, also. And both of them were unequivocally supportive of my continuing to train. And when I realized all of these papers, I sat with Jeff in a Panera Bread, and I had these shopping bags of like manuscripts. And I'm like, you will not believe this. And manuscripts on biking and Parkinson's and all types of data on how important exercise is, even some early clinical studies that showed that maybe there's an impact on progression. And again, early, but I'll take a couple of early promising studies. So really intrigued. So on the training side, that was really my thread of strength. And I continued to train. I learned that it's not only important to do aerobic activity, but I needed to do flexibility, and I needed to do balance and agility, and I needed to do motor coordination types of movements and challenge my cognitive brain while I was doing those. So I learned a lot about how I could do things myself that would help me live with this disease. But that was those were the easier parts, to be honest with you. The harder parts were what was going on in my head and what was going on at work. In my head, I was terrified. I think when you hear that 60 to 80% of those nerve cells that are producing dopamine are gone, are not working, by the time you develop motor symptoms, to kind of realize that train has left the station and it's been going on for years, it was really difficult for me emotionally. I was at work. I was full-time at work, teaching 3 courses and running 2 centers, and no one really knew anything was wrong on the outside. But inside, it was really chaos. I would drive in the middle of the day to the Charles and sit there and I keep video diaries, as many of you may know from either reading the introduction or seeing the story. And I would just pour my heart out in terms of how scared I was. And I guess I want to also add, Stephanie, I think I've talked to you a little bit about this. Some people will say, well, like, why are you so despairing? There's other parts of this. And I think one thing I have learned, it is really okay to despair when you have a life-altering diagnosis. There were a lot of moments that I was just incredibly overwhelmed. And there were a lot of moments where I was really in the fight. Like, I'm going to do whatever I can do. And both were true. At work itself, some of you know that I do a lot of multimedia and educational stuff where I am speaking and thinking and drawing and teaching all at the same time. And that requires a lot of multitasking I did not realize. And I started to have a lot of trouble in that area. And those were the couple of people at work that did know in that area. So That too was really difficult. Something you do really, really well, and then all of a sudden you just can't do it, and you're not exactly sure why. So in short, it was really tough. I will say, because I always want to be positive, that even though such a hard time, worked really hard with my teammates and my coach and that little triathlon community where I was open. And 1 year after I was diagnosed, I did the full Ironman and a half Ironman and a big training camp. And that was a huge moment for me, not because of the race part, but because what seemed so impossible, just was. It was possible. And there was something about that helped me.
That's incredible. So somewhere in the midst of what you were describing as just being overwhelmed, vulnerable, and scared as well as hopeful, you made the decision to let the New York Times follow you around for 2 years. And I'm a former journalist myself. I've done some of those long form stories where you follow a subject around, and I know how intense it can get and how vulnerable it can be for the subject. And so I'm just trying to imagine what it was like in your shoes making that decision to let them in the biggest platform in American media, to let them follow you. Take us back to what that decision, what prompted you to make that decision?
Well, if I had heard what you just said, I might have not done it, but it didn't. I had a couple of people approach me after I did the Ironman, and the one thing I knew I didn't want any type of story about girl with Parkinson's does Ironman. I met John Branch through someone else, and we had a conversation, and interestingly, as we were trying to get to know each other, and as you know, he's a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and a man of incredible integrity, a real professional. And what we both agreed on as we were getting to know each other is what we didn't want. He wasn't interested in writing that story. I wasn't interested in that story. But as I was getting my bearings in that first 2 years, I was struck, even myself, what a difficult journey was going on inside of me. And I just felt this combination of, I am so lucky. I am so fortunate. I'm a physician. I understand what I'm reading. I'm a public health scientist. I can sort of see the big picture, and I'm connected and can ask questions and find people to help me. I had the ability to get a trainer. I had the ability to hire a physical therapist if insurance wouldn't pay for it. And I just felt this sheer responsibility to try to speak out loud and to try to give voice to what is so difficult. Because for the most part, I looked fine. Like, for the most part, no one knew anything was wrong. And how could that be, that you are falling apart, but no one knows what's wrong? You're continuing to function. And so I think that was what drove me to make that leap. I will say, John and I didn't know where it was going, and we said in that first call and in many calls, we're just going to stay in touch. And it was really for a year. We just talked, and he always said, at any point, you can just walk away. You don't have to do this. And so it was really a leap of faith. And a relationship over a long period of time.
Yeah, I find that remarkable, and that I know that was a huge help to know that they wouldn't publish unless you gave the go sign. So walk us through those 2 years. You shared with him some of your video diaries, hundreds, I think, of your video diaries you shared with him where you were at your most vulnerable. You let him follow you around and stay with you during triathlon trainings and races. So what was it like to give him and the photographer, Sophie Parks, that kind of unfiltered access?
It was not uncomplicated. There were highs and lows and some hard moments, as you would expect. I think it requires a lot of mutual trust to let someone in your life to see you at those raw moments, and you really don't know what they are going to write. It did take me, I think, a year and a half into our relationship, I found in a conversation we had that I was not going to get to see the story and edit it. So that was a big surprise. Then I learned that I wasn't going to get to see any of the photographs that were taken. So I don't know if you can imagine being followed around for 2.5 years. When you wake up, you're not looking good. You've all seen, you may have seen the very large photo after a swim at like 5:30 in the morning in a wetsuit. You don't know what they're going to use. So those were hard pieces. I think more fundamentally, I am both strong and I am really vulnerable. And I kept thinking and grappling with what snapshots are they going to choose to show? Mm-hmm. And if you think about it, our whole life is filled with these snapshots. I've been doing so much thinking about this lately. And it's, on the one hand, we choose the snapshots we want people to see. So if you use social media, you choose certain snapshots you want to put there, and then that becomes your image to whoever sees those snapshots. It's very powerful. There's a lot of power in picking snapshots and then revealing someone's reality. And so the hard part for me was trusting that they were going to pick snapshots that reflected me. And I think what I felt is what I can do, the only thing I can do to help make sure that is done in a way that feels consistent with who I feel I am inside, is to let him see everything. For me to not try to impose what I wanted him to see, but to actually just let him be with me, to let him see those videos of moments in time where I'm feeling something, I'm going through it right at that minute. I'm not going to explain it. I might be much better 2 minutes later, but I just let him see all of it. And I thought that was the best way that the genuine reality of what I was experiencing, that I believed he would be able to write that.
So I'm dying to ask you what you thought of the story, but I'm going to wait. And first, I'm going to ask you, during those 2 years, your disease progressed. You experienced many ups and downs with your training, and I'd love to just, if you could walk through a little bit about what you were going through during those 2 years, apart from being engaged with the New York Times.
Yeah, so my disease progressed, and again, you don't see it on the outside. I remember John said to me, he would say things once in a while, and I would share with him that I was irritated. One of the things he said to me one day was, how do I even know you progressed? He was talking to me, and I said, I'm in a little video. We were on a chat, or I sent him like a video. We were going back and forth. And I was like, if there's anything that you have learned over the last couple of years, it's that it's so difficult to see progression. One of the ways that gripped me in terms of progression is I would watch my little pill bottle. I would take the first couple of years, I took, 3 pills a day. And then I had like a fancy pill bottle, which I would have the different medications in, and I take different ones when I work out and do endurance sports. So I had like 2 fancy ones, and I put them in a baggie. And then it got even more complicated. And as you see those medications increase and the number of things you need to take, your symptoms might stay the same, or you might look the same, but you're taking more. So that was one piece that was really visible to me. The second is kind of what I call the middle of the night reality check. Like, oh yeah, I have Parkinson's disease. When you get up and you're not walking the same way. Another is that, I got injured quite a bit. I've had, I think, 5 or 6 fractures from the time I've known John, that little trips, I have a foot that drags a little bit. And so I struggled with all of those pieces, and, he saw that, but there were also, I got better at adapting.
And that's what I want to ask you about. That one of the things that struck me so much in that New York Times story was about the adaptations you made as an athlete and as a triathlete. So I'd love to hear if you could explain a little bit about what those were.
So on the training side, I was so fortunate to have people I felt comfortable from the get-go sharing my diagnosis with people I was training with. So my coach Jeff and his family, my team, Breakthrough Performance Coaching, and the athletes on that team were also supportive of me, and they knew. And the 2 bike mechanics at our local bike shop, Fast Splits, the triathlon shop. And, every step of the way, I just found that there was help in brainstorming how to get around things. And so if it was, might be pink duct tape on my hands that a swim coach recommended because I have poor proprioception. We've changed things on my bike, a long straw so I didn't have to bend over to get it. We changed the cleat so I could clip out when I didn't have that control in my foot anymore. Different types of electronic shifters. So kept adapting. And I think one of the things about it that it felt like just problem solving. You know, it was like everyone was helping me problem solve. There's something about problem solving that feels like you're moving forward. You're solving a problem so you can do something. And so that whole world of adaptations, it helped me keep doing what I wanted to do. But it just was this sort of example, like a little laboratory example of, okay, I just need to solve the problem. Mm-hmm. And it leaked over. It leaked over into my work world as well.
Yes, and I was going to ask you about that because you mentioned earlier that you have this unique, and you're known as such an innovative educator, and it's because of this multimedia style that you have of conveying information, and you mentioned before that you were having trouble doing it all at once, multitasking. So how did you adapt to be able to still deliver your unique style of teaching?
So, yeah, so that was a tough, and I'll say a couple of things about it. One is I want to give a shout out to the couple of staff that work most closely with me in my multimedia teaching. They did know. I know this story made it seem like no one knew in the world until the story was published, but the people most close to me in the studio knew because I had a tremor. And when I teach, I have a camera that goes above and can see everything my hands are doing. I wound up getting a foot pedal, and my tremor would start like making the camera go wild as I tried to like read a script. So we kept modifying things in the studio, but there was like one story I'll share with you was a real lesson to me. It turned out to be a lesson. I draw things as I'm teaching, and I teach while I'm sketching, and the sketch is usually in a particular way to relay complex information with some scaffolding. And I couldn't do that all at once. So what I would do is I got an iPad, and I was using a drawing program, and I would draw ahead of time. And then I would cut pieces out. They'd be all colored in, cut them out. And I would have all the pieces laid out. And these staff members would help me. It'd be like a visual language. And I would move the pieces around instead of a drawing. And it was all workarounds. And we had an event where we had a ton of high school teachers come over, and they're looking at these baggies of drawings that are next to all of the things there, and they're like, well, what are these? Like, what are these? Could we have these? I'm like, oh, that's the visual language that accompanies the material. And they started to move them around, and they started to sort of, well, I could put together a lesson like using these as visuals. And it was just this example where something that was a workaround actually kind of became this sort of pedagogical innovation. And it led to a way of doing something that I hadn't even really ever thought of. And it was just a really big lesson of I might think differently. I had trouble with multitasking and doing that all at once. It's really, really frightening to me to have cognitive effects from Parkinson's. I think when you're at an academic institution where some of the currency of your value is your thinking, the fear I had about what does this mean for my identity, what will people think? I wasn't so focused on the what will people think, but it was in the back of my head. I think discovering that I could find ways to do things that were more innovative maybe than what I did, it just balanced some of that uncertainty and fear.
And going back to the triathlons, one of the things I love, I heard you on a podcast, I think with your brother, was it your brother's podcast? And you were talking about the lessons you learned from the back of the pack and the community that you found in triathlon and endurance sport. So as you were problem solving, as you were adapting in the classroom, you were also finding this community. What did that mean to you, and how did you, what insight did you draw from those experiences?
So you mean during races?
Yeah, during races, the community that you found in your whole triathlon community.
Yeah, I think, I drew a lot of strength from training, from my connection to the community, and from the races themselves. The training, I really think that I consider living with Parkinson's is very much like training for an endurance event. Consistency, just keep adapting, keep moving forward. You have to move. If you don't, you really, really feel very different. It's just such a critical piece. And to be able to do that movement, you need to be strong in other ways. You need to sleep. You need to, all of those lifestyle factors that we actually all need in public health. You know, I'm a public health person, so we know that exercise is critical. So all of those pieces are important for Parkinson's and for public health. So that was one piece. The second was the community and connection. And you know, I'll just tell you one very, very quick anecdote. I mentioned the bike mechanics, and I have been struck over and over at how the kindness of an individual in a certain moment that you don't even know can make this big difference in your life for a moment, and those add up. And one of those mechanics, when I was just diagnosed that next week, said, wait, I'm going to call someone. He called his father. And his father knew people at the Davis-Finney Foundation. And he handed me a piece of paper with the executive director of the Davis-Finney Foundation. And Davis-Finney, for those of you that don't know, was a professional cyclist. He has Parkinson's disease, developed it very early in his career. And he started a foundation with kind of a mantra of living well now, living well today, and celebrating the victories of every day. And I took that message, even though I didn't call for 2.5 years. I took that message. I kept that in my wallet for literally 2.5 years until the day I called. And that message became a really important kind of cheer for me. And so I think I want to say that all of those individual interactions, whether even you've met the person or just people in your life that have supported you, especially in that training triathlon world, they add up. They add up to be scaffolding. I think what Stephanie is referring to is, I often talk about what I learned from races. Races are particular, I think of them as my laboratories. And there's a couple of things about them that have helped me a lot. One is I'm really open during races, and I don't know why, I feel like a sense of absolute like joy that I'm somehow able to do this, that I'm somehow able to get there. I'm also, maybe because I'm not so open anywhere else, I'm so private, I'm very open there. Like, I will talk to anyone that will talk to me about Parkinson's disease. And I had people even write to me after the story was published, and I would say, and they said, you know, we met you at a race and you were teaching us all in the swim line for an hour about Parkinson's disease. And so I find, and what Stephanie's referring to as at the back of the pack is, so here's a news flash, I'm not that good. I'm not that fast. And I am generally towards the back of the pack. And when you're at the back of the pack, you talk. You know, you're especially, you know, if you're on a full hour 15, you are not running anywhere. Okay, you are trying to, like, you know, hurl your body down those last several miles. And in a half, which is, you know, at 8.5 hours is the limit, also pretty long. And I just felt like I would meet people, and maybe they don't have Parkinson's, but everyone that is in the back is struggling with something. They're there for a reason, and they're struggling to move forward. And I can't remember if you and I talked about this, Stephanie, but you know, we're in such a fractured world right now. We're very polarized. We have been for a while. It's difficult to know how to break those boundaries down when life is so busy, and you mostly are with people that you have affinity with, and so it's hard. In my triathlon world, it's not like that. The people in the back of the pack are a big mix of people that think differently, that have different perspectives, that have views that I don't agree with. I have views they don't agree with. But I don't think I've ever, in my 12 races or any of my training with other people, ever had anything but really positive interactions, because we talk about our children, talk about, you know, cancer someone's getting over. We talk about my Parkinson's. We talk about, you can do it. No one is, you know, I don't ask someone how they vote or what they feel when they're sitting on a curb and they're about to give up. And we say, like, come on, get up. You know, lean on me. And I think there's something, I want to write something about what I've learned from the back of the pack. There's just like this belief in how much stronger we are when we draw on the strengths of our fellow human beings, and like kind of our shared our shared humanity. And that helped me a lot. It really helped me a lot. I don't know if you want to hear another thing about races, but I will say the one other piece about races is about facing your fear. And I'm going to be honest with you, like having Parkinson's is not the worst thing in the world. And I certainly try to be hopeful, but it also is not great. And I'm scared. And there's something about the races that have helped me with that fear piece. And so I'll give you one example using the swim, the triathlon swim. So in addition to not being a great runner or biker, I am a terrible swimmer. And, everyone's in the water at once. I'm kind of small. So I'm in the water, there's hundreds and hundreds of other people in the water. They're mostly bigger than me. And I'm not that good. I'm 64 years old. I have a pacemaker and I have Parkinson's disease. There's not a lot to feel confident about. And so I kind of get through my swims. And to this day, I have never ended a swim where I'm not climbing out of the water and people are kind of helping you and they're like hauling you back up, where I don't stop and I take a moment and I cannot believe that I'm alive. I just cannot believe it. And I will celebrate with whoever's there. I will stop. I will cheer for myself. If Jeff, my coach, is there, I'll often scream out, am I winning? Which I clearly am not. And there's something about realizing that you are terrified, but you're fine. You're absolutely fine. And just that one sort of step after another. And there's something about that has just helped me in my regular life to sort of recognize that a moment that I'm terrified, or a moment that I feel like I'm about to drown, or that I'm about to get shoved by people that seem to have ill will, is just a moment. And if I can stay calm and get through that moment, then I'm going to be okay. So I often joke that training and triathlon is a little laboratory. I'm sure many people feel like this about athletics, but it really has been for me.
That's great. Those are tremendous lessons for all of us, I think. And almost, but not quite, makes me want to try triathlon. I think I would be even farther
Anyone
back
that
than you.
wants to try.
Yes. So now we're coming to the moment where the story is published, and you know it's going to be in the New York Times the next day, but you don't know what it's going to say or what photos there's going to be. You open up the paper, or maybe you went online. What was your reaction?
I called Stephanie the week before it came out, and she gave me some advice. She said, take a deep breath, sit down, don't react, take a walk, and then read it again. And I took your advice. I ran, I didn't walk. The first thing was, I was horrified at the title. I was like, it was the opposite of being private. I'm so private, and it's also kind of brilliant of John. It was, so I saw the title, and first thing I thought of, I'm just going to be honest, was you could not be more creative than that. You couldn't think of anything, but that was the first thing. The second thing is the secret, the piece about framing it as a secret. I never really felt like I was keeping a secret. I didn't feel like I was hiding. I felt like I was making a choice for myself about what I wanted to reveal to who and when. I think that one thing I've learned is that we all react very differently, and we all go through navigating really hard things in ways that are okay for ourselves, and that might look different for one person than another. For me, I just wasn't ready to talk to others about it, and so that piece I kind of wouldn't have used the same words. But long story short, I think in the big picture, John did exactly what he promised he would do, which is he wasn't writing the story for me. He was writing the story for someone that would read the story. And that's what I wanted. I wanted someone to read it, and I wanted to have them feel less alone. And on the photo side, I will always find it curious that the one photo I looked good in was 2 inches, and the one where I looked strong was about like this big. You need a magnifying glass to see it. And the one where I look 92, sort of like a prune, an older prune, is like 5:30 in the morning in a wetsuit and is covering almost an entire page of the New York Times. So I'll just kind of leave it at that. But in general, I will say I think the world of John Branch and Sophie Park, of their professionalism, and I think the story, I hope, has done what I had hoped it would do.
That's great. I would always just blame my editors in that situation when it was a headliner photo that the subject didn't like. Okay, so let's go to you. You talked about your reaction. What response did you get? I know you got a tremendous response. Talk a little bit about what you heard from readers of the story.
So I was overwhelmed with the response to the story. There were hundreds and hundreds of letters. I think, from my colleagues who were very supportive, that was one piece. But in the big picture, I heard from like 2 groups: people with Parkinson's disease and people who love someone with Parkinson's disease. And the overriding message was, I felt less alone when when I read this story. And there were so many letters, like these incredible moments people had where they'd been unable to tell someone like how they were feeling, like how it was going in those early years. And they told me that they took the story and they just sent it to the person and said, could you read this? And then they would describe how they talked to that person for the first time in this open way. And it was so both of those types of things, pardon me, I put the tissues underneath, but both of them were just so meaningful. I think of the people with Parkinson's disease, a really large group, a large proportion, were people that were kind of like me. They were working in their first several years of diagnosis, struggling with those issues of identity and uncertainty and disclosure that I talked to you about, that I felt. Not all of them in positions where they didn't feel there would be consequences to them being open. And so I wanted so hard to respect everyone that took the time to write, and I felt the best way I can respect the fact that these individuals took time to write to me is to read everyone and to try to listen and learn in terms of what I want to do next and try to think about that. So those were sort of the main pieces that I heard.
So that perfectly anticipates our next question, which is, what's next for you? I know it's only been a few months since the story came out, but if you could talk a little bit about where you're headed at work and athletically as well.
So it's only been a few months, Stephanie said, and I've never been one that's phenomenal at balance. So just to get it out there. So one is, one of the things I think I've thought a lot about, is that who you are before you have this diagnosis is still who you are after the diagnosis. And so first and foremost, I am who I am, and I love what I do. I'm so committed to public health, and this is such a consequential and important time for public health that my commitments to my profession are as strong as ever. At the same time, I really want to do something to help change the landscape for Parkinson's. I'm one person, and there are incredible organizations and foundations, some of whom I've been really privileged to be working with now, and individuals and scientists and advocates. There's so many people that are making contributions. So what I'm trying to do is to find the areas that I do best and how I can leverage those to be able to do something. So, briefly, I love education. I'm incredibly interested in designing multimedia education that can reach people, as you know. And so some of what I'm doing is efforts to develop materials that will, some of them will be targeting people, their families, people living with the disease. And the goal of those is really to enable them to ask the right questions. So really empower them to be able to know more, be curious more about their own, what is going on in them. I think some of them, I would like to have an effort to the medical community that is not a specialist in neurology. So some credibility as a physician, as well as in public health, and there's a huge need. Most of my physicians that are not my neurologist, surgeons that I saw for breaks, did not really know a lot about Parkinson's disease, and in particular about the impact of exercise. So I feel like that's a place that I can really make a dent. And then the other piece to that, Stephanie, education and policy-wise, is obviously I am so wedded to the benefits of exercise. And this too really is aligned with my public health goals. Exercise and moving is important for all of us. And it's not only the education about exercise and getting that word out. And when I say exercise, I'm talking about the broad spectrum of the types of activity we need to do, the sleep that goes with it, the healthy nutrition that goes with it, that whole package. So I think in that area, I also want to put on my policy hat, because it's not just education. We need the policies that will enable that. And then the kinds of program evaluation and implementation and research on how to get people to do it. What are the nudges we need? What are the ways we get people to move? And so, and then I guess the third piece I'll say, which also is aligned with my identity in public health and global health, is when I think back to my work in HIV, AIDS, even HPV and cervical cancer, HPV vaccine in particular, there was always a time where you're looking ahead at the horizon and wanting to have something happen, and there needed to be synthesis work to develop an investment case. And I want to think about doing that with Parkinson's disease to try to get Parkinson's on the global agenda. It's not just about making Sinemet the most common replacement for dopamine available worldwide, although it should be. It's about really making an investment case to figure out how do we get Parkinson's included as we think about universal health coverage packages and other big global efforts that are going on. So that's another area that I'm interested in working in.
Just a few goals, I guess. That's that's wonderful. So we only have about 2 minutes left. I'm going to sneak in a question that we got from the audience because I know the answer already and I love it so much. I'm just going to ask you to repeat it to everybody, which is when you are working out or in a race and you're hitting the wall and really exhausted, is there a mantra or something that you do to keep yourself going?
Oh, God. Well, you all know that in triathlon, you can't listen to anything on a headphone. So it's a long time alone. I wish I had a really good answer to this, but here's what I do. I sing, and I don't know any songs, so I sing usually like one line. I feel good, over and over and over again, loudly. When I'm really, really in bad shape, I will count, 1 to 10 and 10 to 1, and I count out loud. And I sing out loud. So that's my method.
And maybe that's motivating the people near you to go even faster. Try to get away from the one-note song. No, that's fantastic. I love that. I love that answer. Okay, so our official last question is just, as a scientist, as a public health leader, and as a person living with Parkinson's, what's one thing that you would really like people to know?
There is a lot to be optimistic about in Parkinson's. There's incredible scientific advances being made by scientists and again by organizations that are supporting the investments in research. So there's a lot, we know a lot more, we understand a lot more, but there is a lot to be optimistic about, but there's still a ways to go before there'll be anything that will help really change what I'm facing. Someone that already has the disease, that already has lost all those neurons, it may not be available for someone like me, but I still think in the big picture there's a big reason to be optimistic. I think what I would also say, especially for those that already have the disease, that have already lost a bunch of neurons, have lived with the disease for several years, I think there's also a lot more we know about what we can do to feel better. There's a lot more we know about the role of exercise and the role of activity. And I think the final point is, uncertainty is a negative, and it can also be a positive. I'm live with uncertainty, and I've felt the difficulty of that, but I'm choosing to try to think about it as maybe a positive, and that maybe there's hope in that uncertainty. Maybe I can find hope in that I'm not destined to follow one particular pathway and end up at this spot. That I'm going to choose to think about, well, maybe it isn't going to work out that way. Maybe all of the work I'm doing to try to be healthy and to try to move, maybe my pathway will be somewhat different. So I think what I try to say to people is, like, let's embrace the uncertainty and try to think as much as we can positive, that there's room there. There's room there for maybe things to be different, and hopefully some combination of the science and the praying will help those people living with this disease.
Thank you, Sue. This was such a meaningful and rich conversation, and I feel like I will be rewatching it myself, because there's so many gems and so much insight. And for those watching, if you missed any part of it or want to rewatch it, it'll be on the Harvard Chan School's YouTube channel. So thank you so much for tuning in and for being here in the studio. Have a great afternoon. Thank you, Sue.
Stephanie. Thank you.